Freedom of information, easy for me to say. Freedom of information sometimes is hard to execute. There's an act called the Freedom of Information Act. Funny start to the show, apologize for that. Phil Isle is my guest, former news editor of the Providence Phoenix, and he's been here before telling us the story of his effort to get some information from a trial, to get all the evidence in a trial that convicted a man that he is writing about, and he has now gone through more hoops, including our federal legislators, to try to get some help, and I don't think he's gotten very far, and he's here to continue to complain about it, and I think you'll find the case fascinating, and so we shall meet with Phil coming up momentarily. Thank you for watching the broadcast. I am Dan York. This is my state of mind. Let us hustle to the rundown, as we call it. Yeah, it was very strange seeing the boss of the Patriots in the court today. I don't know if you saw it, but I think you'll find it strange. Another courtroom is nothing but misty eyes and broken hearts, and I wonder, what are we doing? The governor asserts something, and I say, no, you got it wrong. Continually, you got it wrong. I'll explain. This is a controversy in Cranston that just is getting silly. And way too complicated for no good reason. And the snow brought us this for April. I'm not so sure it's enough. Of course, we're interested in your state of mind, so we'll ask you to react to it. Let's dig in here. The first item on the agenda for conversation tonight is that Bob Kraft was on the stand. Here's the headline from WPRI.com. The Patriots owner is going through the play-by-play of when he brought Aaron Hernandez in to ask him about whether or not he was involved in this death of Mr. Lloyd. Here's some of what Mr. Kraft said on the stand.
I understood there was an incident that had transpired, and I wanted to know whether he was involved, and if he was, I wanted to make sure he's part of any player who comes into our system, I consider part of our extended family, and I wanted to get him help.
Well, here's the situation. Listen, I don't know where this case is going to end up. And to be frank with you, I haven't followed every tooth and nail of it because the whole thing disgusts me. But I will tell you this. It's kind of strange and brings home how big the New England Patriots are and how much Aaron Hernandez must have, with due process still to come, screwed up here. But I was wondering, now all the national cameras show up, right? And ESPN comes in and covers this, and all the national sports journalists are in covering this. Did you notice that during the Super Bowl, a terrific run for the Patriots, right? There was no sports journalism about this case at all, period. In fact, if you look at the broadcasts, the long 6-hour pregame show, whatever they have there, not a mention of this case while it's going on for the Super Bowl. Pretty convenient for the NFL and for the sports journalists who want to look the other way. Until what, the off season? I'm not saying it had to be front and center, but, it's kind of hard to follow the roller coaster of journalistic ethics in this whole deal. Next item. Yeah, I don't know. Why are we doing this? Why do we have this case going on? The headline here, just brutal. The jurors have to see all of this. The CBS chronicles what the jurors saw.
This never-before-seen photo was taken 1 minute before the bombing. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev can be seen standing behind a tree, right behind his youngest victim, 8-year-old Martin Richard. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Henry Niels showed jurors the clothes Richard was wearing that day, pointing out a gaping hole in his shirt where the blast ripped open his torso. In the gallery, Richard's parents, Bill and Denise, quietly listened. Jurors also saw the autopsy photos of Lindsay Liu, the 23-year-old grad student who was near the finish line when the second bomb exploded. Liu was conscious as she bled to death, Lindstrom adding that the injuries would be very painful. The graphic testimony and autopsy pictures brought several jurors to tears. One even covered her face in her scarf.
Why wouldn't they? We knew this was going to be the result. The jurors would have to take a look at this and have to suffer through all of this. The family has to suffer through all of this. I know there are plenty who think this is catharsis, and I know there are plenty who think this is going to end up in some kind of death penalty for Mr. Tsarnaev, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think the defense is going to be in a position where they'll wait out what might be the world record quickest verdict on a guilty plea. I mean, on a guilty case. I mean, they're trying this guy with the defense saying, listen, we know he did it. So that ought to take what? A half a sandwich in the jury room and everyone says, all right, we ready? Good, he's guilty. Then we go back out and we listen to more arguments about how his brother made him do it. And I'm predicting, like most legal scholars are, that the jury will say his brother made him do it and he'll spend the rest of his life in jail, which is exactly where we are when we start the case. I don't get it. Next item, the Providence Journal. So I saw this headline today and I just shook my head thinking, come on, Governor? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The governor says the pension settlement would close the chapter and let the world move on. It absolutely doesn't. And I can't believe she keeps saying things like this. Why is she saying things like this? Does anybody know? Why is she doing that? If the case is settled, it will not answer the question which is the basis of the lawsuit, which is there constitutional protection for the legislature to change the statute regarding pensions? Now, I've said this almost every night here for months on end, almost every day on the radio from noon to 3 on WPRO, and I know I've got lots of others who are also echoing the same kind of thoughts, but the governor doesn't seem to get it. She wants the convenience of putting this thing behind her, but the truth of the matter is it will linger as a question for every legislature going forward. It doesn't close any chapters. A Supreme Court decision is the only thing that will do that. Have you followed this case on the Good Friday thing? I mentioned it a week or two ago. The headline on this one today in the Journal cracked me up. So the judge, the local judge says, okay, look, interimly, I'm going to decide that if the teachers in Cranston who have petitioned for a day off for Good Friday do so by Wednesday, they are good. But it doesn't prevent the school department from perhaps docking them some pay. The Cranston School Department has a couple religious observation days built into the employment contract. The 2 days that have been used in the fall are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur for the Jewish teachers. This is a Christian day on Friday, the most solemn day of the Christian calendar year, correct? We'll talk more about it on Good Friday. The idea that the teachers want this day off is ironic because most of them will be at the malls and if the weather was nice, at the golf course. But there are teachers who are earnest about their observance and there shouldn't be any penalty for making this happen. And the idea that the Cranston schools wanted to kind of regulate, how they would take the day off or argue, listen, you don't really have to be off on Good Friday because there's services at 7 o'clock on Friday night. They're absolutely completely out of their minds and out of control, thinking they can have a voice in that conversation. This is not that hard. If you have 2 days in the contract for a religious observation, you let them take it. And if you don't have enough teachers, you cancel school. You made the deal. I don't know why the judge is struggling with this one. And what do we have? Lastly, do-over day. This is kind of funny. I understand why the Providence and Warwick Visitors Bureaus and Chambers and the hospitality folks have all come together for this idea, which is to try to get everybody back into the restaurants. It's called Do-Over Day. The headline is right here. It's a bomb after the storm. Get it? They had a press conference, and the first gentleman was kind of leading the argument that everyone needs to get into the restaurants on April 18th because there'll be nothing but specials and all sorts of great opportunities to help to reimburse the coffers of those businesses most hurt by the storms. Seems to me that we need a do-over month. I don't know that a day is going to make it, but we'll invite those folks in and help them along because we like to help the economy around here. Your state of mind is important to us. Just give us a ring at 228-1886. Email me at stateofmind@myeritv.com. Facebook and tweet at me. Don't forget the E. And we look forward to getting your response to some of these matters. When we come back, a pretty interesting case of follow-up, and I just don't know that Phil's gotten anywhere. So tell us. Stay with us. All right, you and I are going to do a lot of listening here because this is a fascinating story that's very complicated, but might be crystallizing because Phil has finally said, you know what, I'm not taking it anymore, and I'm suing. Here's some stuff to look at. This is Dr. Volkman, who is the center of the investigation. That's Phil up in the corner investigating, and that's his dad and Dr. Volkman, who went to school together, and he'll explain the whole thing coming together here, right here. So, former news editor of the Providence Phoenix, miss your writing every day. What are you doing? What are you doing?
I'm doing some freelancing.
Yeah?
I'm doing some stuff for Rhode Island Monthly, the Jewish Daily Forward, working on a piece for Boston Magazine.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm staying busy. And working on this.
And this is really a huge project, which has now become maybe even more dramatic than the story that you're trying to nail down warrants.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, before I start, I should just say what I have been saying. I never set out to sue the DEA. I never set out to send President Obama a letter. I never set out to file complaints with my 2 senators and my U.S. rep. All I wanted was evidence from a trial that took place, it'll be 4 years ago.
That you found fascinating.
Yeah, well, so to back it up, a guy that my dad went to college and medical school with is currently serving 4 consecutive life terms in federal prison for massive prescription drug dealing scheme. I learned about this after his indictment, before his trial in 2009. That's when I learned about it. Sent him a letter, ended up interviewing him, ended up diving really deep into an investigation of the story, you know, basically what happened to this guy and what was the story of the town where he was practicing, et cetera. His trial happens in federal court in Cincinnati in Ohio for 8 weeks in 2011. Big trial, I mean comparable with the Hernandez trial and the Tsarnaev trial in terms of the scope of it, not necessarily the attention, but the government presented 70 witnesses over 8 weeks. They presented over 200 exhibits. And when it ended, I said to first the clerk of the court, hey, can I see the evidence that the jury saw? Which to me still strikes me as a pretty straightforward request. This stuff had been published in the sense that it had been shown to a jury in a federal court during an open trial, a trial that we all paid for with our tax dollars and an investigation that we all paid for. And that simple request, 4 years approaching after the verdict, still hasn't been filled.
What's the precedent for that kind of request being fulfilled?
That's where it gets a little murky. I mean, if you go to the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press, they have a page, one of their legal interns has written a paper about what happens to trial evidence, and there have been precedent cases saying, yes, this stuff should be published, but in practice, it doesn't always shake out that way. The gold standard is from one of the 9/11 conspirator trials. If you go to online to the District of Virginia, they've put thousands of exhibits online for the prosecution against Jeffrey Massoui, I think is how you say his name. And that, to me, is great. I mean, high-profile case, every single exhibit except for 7 of 1,000, which they said were redacted.
Have you found a case where a similar journalistic request was made and it was complied with in complete satisfaction to the person who was requesting?
Not one that matches it exactly. Not one where a journalist came after the trial ended and said, hey, I want to see this stuff. In the case of the Tsarnaev trial, I mean, a lot of the evidence is being kind of live broadcast. It's being described, in some cases being released to the media immediately. This case didn't match that level of press coverage, and therefore, evidence and exhibits weren't being shown on the nightly news that night, so it's a little bit different. In fact, there really wasn't a beat reporter in the courtroom for all of those 8 weeks, which may have, if that had happened, the vibe might be a little bit different. But here I'm kind of apparently the only person, aside from news organizations that wrote about when the trial was beginning and when the sentence and the verdict were delivered, I'm kind of the only guy asking about this.
You don't have a predisposition about the case, correct?
No, I've interviewed the guy, and I've gone to the town, and I've been to the side street where he was practicing out of an unmarked house, which was really sketchy, and I heard stories from the neighbors about how cars lined the street and people were knocking on the wrong doors asking, is the doctor home? I heard a lot of stuff to indicate that there was a lot of sketchy behavior happening here, but that's not the same thing as seeing the evidence that was used to convict him. So yeah, I have ideas, But when people ask me, well, did he do it? I can only say he was convicted. But for someone who wants to write a book about it, and I think more importantly, to just have an open conversation about what is a very high-profile prescription drug dealing case, we should have more than just the government press release announcing that we got the bad guy.
All right, so when we come back, Phil will kind of describe exactly what he's done here. Yes, he has filed a lawsuit. The ACLU is helping him. And I think a lot of us are just going to scratch our heads and say, well, why won't they just do this? Stay with us. Phil Isle, my guest, former news editor of the Providence Phoenix, attempting to write a book about the story of this Dr. Paul Volkman, who was convicted on multiple counts or multiple...
This guy was the largest dispenser of oxycodone in the country, according to prosecutors, from 2003 to 2005. And when he was sentenced, he received 4 consecutive life terms in prison. I haven't heard of a sentence that long for a doctor, really, in U.S. history. So this was a really significant prescription drug dealing case.
All right, so you found it fascinating, find it fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm sure your eventual book about it, if it ever gets done, will be fascinating. But in order for you to write your book, you need the evidence, you need the data, you need to compile it, you need to do all those things. For the express purpose of doing what? Double-checking the trial?
Well, being able to tell the story of what happened. But as you said at the outset, what I've run into here is really a different story. Regardless of whether people care about my book, I encountered the just startling incompetence, whatever you want to call it, of the way the government, specifically the Department of Justice, specifically within the Department of Justice, the DEA, handles a Freedom of Information Act request. The Freedom of Information Act was passed because it wanted to give people the ability to ask the question of their government, you know, what are we doing here? What can I see this document? Can I see that document? There's the idea here that we own the paper that the government produces as it goes about its business. And with a few exceptions, we should be able to access that.
Well, certainly in the justice system, after the adjudication of a case, it makes sense that we do.
Think, yeah.
You know, terrorist information.
There are exceptions.
You know, all the kind of confidentiality that goes along with security is a whole other matter. But there's nothing security-wise about this case.
No, it's all been shown to a jury.
Right. Show me, Steve, throw up some stuff on the screen here. I want Phil to kind of walk through. You brought a bunch of exhibits. What's this?
Yes, so on the right there, the DEA told me eventually that there were 16,000 pages in my request. I didn't know how much I was asking for. I just knew I was asking for what the jury saw. So of the 16,000 pages, 16,012, they withheld 14,000. So almost 90% of the pages I asked for, they said, you're not getting them. For exemptions, they said it dealt with invaded people's privacy, they weren't going to release it. So in the remaining 2,012 pages...
But those 14,000 pages worth of evidence were seen by a jury en route to a decision?
I think. I mean, I think there was also some signals getting crossed about... I asked for, the people handling my request aren't the same people who presented the evidence at the trial. And in that game of telephone, I think the number of pages got expanded. And for a lot of things, I don't know. Because
could there be evidence that wasn't let in, the jury never saw?
Maybe.
That is in that you need someone to be able to say, made the trial, didn't make the trial. Correct? No one's doing that.
Yeah, I'm not being told very much.
About anything.
About anything.
What else you got here, exhibit-wise? Let me see what else did you brought there. What is that?
So that's a photograph that was admitted without redaction at the trial. You know, you can see in the bottom right, that's a government exhibit sticker. Mm-hmm. And for me, they redacted it so you can't tell what's going on.
Well, I see Vicks Vapor Rub. What is the?
Well, the Vicks Vapor Rub is not the main event.
Yeah. What's going on? What are the white?
You
what
can't
are the white
tell.
spots?
That's the point. That's one of the things the government has released to me. So the 2,000 pages.
Is that an office setting? What is that?
Yeah, that's from the clinic.
Okay, I get it. Okay.
The scene of the crime, as it were.
All right. So they whited out the picture.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's what you got.
And they do that again and again and again
I
and
get
again.
you. Okay. What else do we got here in terms of exhibits? Now, what is this? A letter to Jack Reed.
Yeah, so eventually, after my request had been just with the DEA for years without them doing much. I explored what avenues of recourse I had, including complaining to my federal legislators. So I sent letters to Representative Cicilline and Senators Reid and Whitehouse. They have each of them on their website, a place to make an inquiry about a problem you're having with a federal agency. I got to learn a bit of a civics lesson about what happens when you have an issue with a federal agency. And all three of them sent letters on my behalf to the DEA asking basically what's going on.
And what did you get?
They got, a few months later, what I thought was a really bogus letter from the DEA.
Are these the letters?
Yeah, they're too blurry, but the DEA did kind of a half apology, one of those "I'm sorry, but the but part didn't make any sense. The whole letter, which anyone, if I've tweeted it out, I posted it on Facebook, it doesn't say a whole lot. It doesn't explain anything in a satisfactory way.
So what was the response by the legislators to the letter that didn't
They
say
didn't
much?
respond. At that point, the wheels were already in motion, and I want to give enormous credit to the Rhode Island ACLU, to whom I appealed in November of last year. I said, here's this crazy situation. Will you help me out? Steve Brown, the executive director, said, this is interesting. I'm going to show it to my legal committee. They eventually helped me out. We got 2 pro bono attorneys, Neil McNamara and Jessica Jewell from Nixon Peabody in Providence, to whom I'm also hugely indebted. And a couple weeks ago, we filed a FOIA lawsuit, which is a category of lawsuit. I, Philip Bile, it says in the lawsuit, I'm suing the DEA, which I never wanted this to happen initially, but I encountered such a crazy roadblock after roadblock that the ball is now in the DEA's court to offer some kind of response.
So what do you think happens from here?
I can tell you what I hope happens.
They say, okay, here's all the stuff, go away.
Yeah.
Write your book. Write your book and shut
up.
up.
In the complaint, my lawyers, who, again, I'm so happy they did this, asked for a statement from the DEA saying they wrongfully withheld the documents. So that'd be a nice cherry on top. Because I do, for the record, I don't think they've legitimately withheld these documents that were shown in an open court.
Do you think this is kind of endemic in federal culture, or that this is something that moves from what has been an oft criticism of the Obama administration, that they're just not very transparent?
Both. I think, unfortunately, my experience is extreme, but in many ways symptomatic and similar to the stories of a lot of different reporters at a lot of different news organizations asking for documents from a variety of federal offices. I follow this FOIA advocacy / news organization, Muckrock, up in Boston. They requested some documents from the George W. Bush Presidential Library, and they said, we'll get back to you. It was more than a decade, their estimate for how long it would take. Admittedly, that's a place that doesn't have a full FOIA office like the CIA or the DEA does, but lengthy delays, absurd redactions.
By the way, if you're confused, FOIA means Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. Simple stuff.
There's a lot of dark humor among journalists about who has had the worst FOIA experience. In fact, recently I went to a kind of tongue-in-cheek awards show in D.C. called the FOIAlies, where they highlighted the worst responses to public document requests.
So do you think that you'll end up becoming a national conversation about your inability to write this book, or will the book end up becoming a national conversation about a very important matter? What is your projection?
I hope that the book, this is a really important subject, prescription drugs and prescription drug abuse and overdoses. We've had hundreds of overdose deaths in Rhode Island over the last couple of years, and it just gets worse in Kentucky and in Ohio. So I certainly hope a book that I eventually write will add to that conversation and shine some light onto the blurry area between practicing medicine and dealing drugs.
Keep in touch.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. One more thing and we come back. Stay with us. Running late, gotta go. The Paw Sox deal tomorrow night. See ya.